that every single journey and every single customer interaction really matters. Are known for the great sort of service expectations that our customers have from us and how we leverage our partner difference to really be able to bring that to life. We aim to make sure that consistency of almost delivering to that customer expectation is that.
Welcome back to the CX Insider podcast. I'm your host, Alicia, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Greg, and a very special guest, Jatin, who is the measurement and tracking lead at John Lewis and Partners. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into the podcast, I'd just like to remind everyone, please leave a comment below to let us know what brand you want to hear from next. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So Jatin, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey?
Sure. I'll maybe start with a little bit about myself and build it into the career journey. So I'm originally from India, where I spent the first 20 years of my life. I was sent to boarding school, not that I was naughty, but it just had to happen since the age of 5.
Yeah.
And obviously, sort of being at boarding, you came home for a couple of months at a time. And that was quite an interesting sort of area where my family is very sort of entrepreneurial. And my dad's sort of been doing a lot of interesting ventures, whether it's setting sort of confectionery shops and or food retail businesses and so forth, even sort of down to opening a clothing showroom at a time. And actually the reason that's relevant to the story is between those times that I had to come home and spend the time on the holidays, it was quite nice to be able to sort of be in those businesses. And that's where it's relevant around sort of, it's almost a bit of a full circle where the time that I've spent looking back, interacting with customers, is kind of linked to my current role, which is about customer experience. So that's quite a nice segue. Been in the UK for coming close to 20 years now. So I came here for my graduation at London South Bank University, and obviously ended up loving here and I've been here since. And obviously through that journey, I've sort of worked at several places. So started my career after finishing my bachelor's working for a subsidiary company that operated with Sky B. So I was looking at customer acquisition, and that's where I really got into getting quite hands-on with data and really beginning to realize that I loved working with data and identifying insights to then be able to sort of feed into how we optimize our acquisition strategies and so forth, which is quite a fun gig. Did that for about 4 years, and then again, sort of built on the bug around data and analytics, and then went into working for GFK, which is a market research consultancy. Worked there for, again, another 4 years or so, working with clients from sectors like automotive, DIY, pet food, and pretty much everything in between. And that's where you really sort of got to the grips of how you interact with data and really be able to sort of understand how that fits into business goals, projects, priorities, objectives, and being able to sort of give those relevant insights to hopefully drive strategy forward. I then caught the bug to then be able to sort of at least try and come across the table to understand what happens with these insights when we deliver them. So that's where an opportunity came up for a company that is US based, but basically operated the brands like DKNY, Champion, etc. in the UK. So I was brought in to set up their category insights function for the UK and Ireland arm of the business. That was quite a fun gig for about 2 years. And then I think an opportunity came knocking to come in and set up an insight function for an art materials business of all places. They've had sort of brands in their portfolio that have been as old as about 300 years, even used on the ceilings of Sistine Chapel, for example.
Wow.
And that was a really, really interesting area where I got to experiment and sort of do some really cool things, from setting up trackings and or sort of looking at how we use social data to be able to sort of identify pockets of opportunities to interact with artists better and everything in between. And I was really loving that sort of experience for about 5 years that I was there. But then it felt like it was the right time to look for a new challenge when the opportunity with John Lewis and Waitrose came knocking around a new sort of measurement and tracking lead role that was developed to help us sort of really laser focus on how we understand customer perceptions of the brands and also look at our customer experiences data and then be able to sort of really feed that into what it means for us and how we don't just look at measures but also understand how to operate with that data to drive actionable customer change. And that's been the journey that I've been on since for the last 2.5 years, and that's where I'm here today.
So much to squeeze in 2.5 years.
Absolutely.
So obviously following customer experience for the podcast, And obviously you're very big on data. So how do you use data to understand what the customer experience of the brand is, whether it be online or shipping or in person?
So as you can imagine, I think with the nature of the business that the partnership deals with, it's sort of really interesting sort of journey that customers take, whether it's across grocery missions for Waitrose or sort of our general merchandise categories for John Lewis. Obviously, we sort of have our own sort of experience tracking programs that we run to be able to understand how experiences are delivering, whether you're shopping in sort of the stores or online or sort of having an omni journey, to then really understand what's the end-to-end customer mission looking like. Also being able to look at sort of if the customers needed help, interacted with our customer care functions, what was that experience like, including sort of where click and collect or fulfillment missions happen. So there's a lot of that experience data that really gets used. But I think beyond that, there's also a lot of customer behavior data that you really have the potential to be able to use alongside it. Because ultimately, every experience matters. And you really want to be able to understand what's the value of a great versus perhaps an experience that didn't quite deliver to expectations, and how we can leverage the feedback that customers give, which is so valuable, especially in today's day and age where no matter how slick we make any sort of tracking mechanisms, it's still demanding the customer give their valuable time. So whatever information we collect, how do we make it actionable and usable to make sure that we can actually close the loop for that customer's feedback and hopefully drive action off the back of it, which sounds easier said than done. So I think, there's the customer behavior data, there's the experience data, which are quite valuable. And I think within those areas as well, especially when we look at experience mechanisms, you've got the traditional sort of feedback surveys, which are quite valuable, but that's one of many sources that actually should be used. And alongside that, whether it's your third-party review sites, your social forums, looking at customer contact data, which is quite rich and powerful to tell us why customers needed to contact, whether it was positive and or something friction-based in their journey, all the way down to looking at what's coming from the shop floors, from the partners, and where there are sort of any mystery shopping tools that are being deployed as well. So I think it's really triangulating all the signals that we collect across those different sources to then be able to triangulate and then quantify where the sort of biggest areas of opportunity and or optimization are, and then hopefully with some luck be able to drive that value into the business through those insights and make that change happen.
Yeah, such a varied range of customer journeys for your brand, because you've got data on individuals doing their everyday shopping versus someone could also walk into a John Lewis and buy a sofa, something they'll do once every 20 years maybe. So that's a huge variety, isn't it? You know, you're going from buying bread and milk to buying that. So I imagine the data challenges that you face are quite significant in that respect.
I think it's definitely quite interesting to be able to sort of understand customer expectations linked to what you said around sort of what their missions are. And they can be quite different depending on sort of, even within grocery, if you come for a full shop versus if you're just picking up something for a lunch, those expectations are quite different. But fundamentally though, I think at the heart of this, you still have customer expectations, which is, I'm here to be able to fulfill a mission, and I'd like to be able to do it as seamlessly as possible. So I think without trying to sort of almost undercomplicate it, if we really understand those particular levels as best as possible, trying to build up the level of understanding of how it is that we really understand and benchmark whether we're delivering to those expectations becomes a bit simpler. And again, I'm really oversimplifying here, but I think that at the heart of it is what we're really trying to do, which is, regardless of what the customer journey or mission was, how do we really understand whether we're able to deliver to those expectations and identify those signals where we've done well, so we really can leverage those signals even more, something that we try and sort of define as win points for us. And then where there are expectations that perhaps we could have better served or improvements that we could have made, how do we then understand those signals, quantify and triangulate them to make sure we're then acting upon those right and more priority areas to then sort of focus on pain points. So I think it's quite an interesting way to try and do it, which isn't particularly different to how maybe the industry does it. But I think that's where doing it consistently is probably the art of where the good versus the great can separate themselves.
That's brilliant. And then to be fair, you've touched on it a little bit already in terms of the data points, but when you're trying to identify those customer journeys, the opportunities where you can do better, like you say, take it from good to great. What sort of data points are you specifically looking at? You did mention obviously customer feedback as a real core data point and other areas, but anything you can share there on like the actual data points that you're looking at to try and measure that good, so that you can take it from good to great?
Sure. And again, this isn't something that's unique to us.
Yeah.
I think most businesses in their tracking programs will have something similar where you measure the sort of classic NPS and CSAT style measures. But I think fundamentally it's almost trying to imagine a triangle where you've got your lead metrics, regardless of whether it's NPS or CSAT. Every business uses their own. And then really understand what are the key drivers to influencing what those sort of lead metrics are. That's where you really start to understand some things will over or under influence how they affect that overall mission. But I think fundamentally, and this is where the richness comes in, when we are able to get that unprompted feedback from customers in their own words around what we really did well versus where we could have improved, that's really sort of that gold mine of data, because being able to sort of understand where customers noticed any value delivering sort of over and above initiatives versus where we might not picked up a particular area of improvement, but for that customer, it mattered to them. That's where I think the value really comes in. And I think depending on sort of the way how that data is triangulated and coded, could come up with anywhere close to like 100, 150 plus themes. But that's where you then take that next step to be able to quantify and triangulate what's more versus less important. And that's not to say that any theme is less important than the other. But the reality is, as a business, you've got to make choices around what you can action, and then it helps to prioritize accordingly as well. And I think to that effect, where we have the opportunity to be able to understand expectations by demographic, by region can be different. So we know, for example, our London-based shoppers might have slightly different expectations of what they expect to be doing. Let's say when it comes to checkout, where someone just wants to be in and out of the mission quite quickly because it's quite busy. Whereas, let's say, in a sort of more relaxed sort of full shop environment, customer might be wanting to have that interaction with a partner. I think that's where it becomes quite interesting to understand. You can't just use a measure to understand whether we are actually delivering or not, because a checkout sort of speed metric might be too isolated in itself to understand whether we're doing well or not. So that's where I think it becomes quite interesting to use everything that we have, but then again identify the signals and then triangulate and qualify to then make sense of it.
What's I find really interesting is how you have two very distinct, of course, very well-known brands, John Lewis and Waitrose in particular. And I guess my question is, do you approach your CX strategy differently across those two brands in any way? And if you do, how? Maybe would be the follow-up to that. But in particular, around certain things like customer loyalty, because I appreciate, like you touched on it already so well, is that, you know, when you're looking at loyalty, and that tends to be built by just consistent brand experience, and it's either above expectation or it's, you know, below generally. Yeah, do you approach that differently across the two brands?
So I think, obviously, as I'm sure most sort of consumers for our brands would associate, I think the partnership brands are known for the great sort of service expectations that our customers have from us and how we leverage our partner difference to really be able to bring that to life. That's not to say we're better than any other business, but I think there's definitely a heightened sense of expectation from John Lewis and Waitrose customers around how we show up for them.
100%.
I think everyone who's sort of interacted with that will have their own sort of view of how they've experienced that in its duality. And I think that's where I feel, as a common thread across both brands in particular, we have that culture that is basically imbibed within the partnership and every partner in terms of how we aim to make sure that consistency of almost delivering to that customer expectation is there. Obviously, the sort of customer strategy for both brands is looking at how we leverage that partner difference as best as possible. And I think we're able to sort of really show up in those different ways. That's where I think the brands are operating slightly differently. When you look at sort of some of our categories in John Lewis, again, as customers for the brands, if we all are, you'd understand that knowing that if there was a particular issue, you know, post-purchase of a product, you can trust the brand to be able to sort of come and help you in that service sort of momentum. That's where I think our brands have a lot of heritage and legacy sort of trust, which I think we absolutely aim to capitalize and deliver on consistently. So I think, again, it might sound a bit bland to repeat it that way, but I think there really isn't any magic formula, but it's more about that consistency of delivering to customer expectations, albeit the difference with John Lewis and Waitrose is there's a heightened sense of expectation, which gives us that additional pressure to be able to make sure we make every experience matter. But I think that's what, speaking as a partner, makes us all go to work every single day to make sure we can deliver to that.
I imagine, even though the strategy is simple, executing at that a big scale is the challenge in some respect. Even though your strategy is simple in terms of what you expect and what you then have as what you expect from your colleagues, and then what actually happens in terms of customers, but that might be simple. But I can only imagine the amount of effort it takes to train that into the business, make sure you're hiring the right people that see and share that vision. I imagine that's where a lot of the work is as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's where in particular, I think the thread of how does that partner difference come to life for customers is probably the golden thread that we really sort of try and focus on, which again, I'm sure doesn't come as a surprise, but a lot goes on behind the scenes to make sure we're able to retain and nurture and leverage that partner difference consistently, whether it's making sure that the service standards that the business has, all partners, new and or old, sort of understand what those are, and we're consistently sort of refreshing those to make sure that that culture and the thread of understanding is always sort of present. And I think that's where I definitely feel, looking at sort of the length of how long these brands have existed for, and the fact that that trust and that service expectation has always been continually kept, probably is a lot of credit to the fact that there's been a lot of good work that's helped drive that momentum.
You've spoken so well on, I guess, what you think brings customer loyalty to John Lewis and Waitrose and Partners. But do you think that for other brands, are there any key elements that you think do kind of stand out for making you a well-known brand for customer experience? I know you said that there wasn't maybe a particular formula for loyalty, but do you feel the same way about customer experience, or do you think that there are key factors contributing to that?
I think I definitely feel the consistency element is probably the thread here. There are loads of brands out there which we all interact with in our day-to-day lives that are able to deliver those brilliant sort of customer moments, in our sort of missions that we have on the journeys where we interact with them. But I think there aren't a lot of brands that can do it consistently, is where I would say it. And I think that's where I feel the difference really stands out for us. Having said that, I think this is where the risk of complacency also happens, because all it takes is one sort of poor or under-delivered experience. And I think in today's world, where there is only an increasing amount of choice that customers have to take their custom elsewhere, regardless of whether it's a grocery mission and or sort of a general merchandise product purchase, that's where I think we really have to be ultra cautious that every single journey and every single customer interaction really matters. And I think it'd be fair to say that even we as a brand don't get every experience right. I think that's where being able to leverage the feedback that we collect to then be able to understand what are those opportunities that we can learn upon, and then hopefully be able to sort of improve, makes that difference. And again, if I had to say sort of, any particular competitor brands, I feel that's where we are definitely picking up in our tracking data as well, that the expectations that customers have just across all brands that they interact with are all sort of increasing quite significantly. And I think that's where it's almost keeping the market quite sort of on their toes to be able to make sure there is no sense of complacency, and we're always having to sort of continually improve our game, which I think ultimately is a win for the customer, because if we can make sure that every single journey has minimum friction as possible, and the opportunity to sort of almost deliver to expectations is helped upon, I think it helps sort of pretty much the entire sector and industry as a whole. So I think it's a great thing, but we do our best to avoid any complacency.
Yeah. So it's almost like relentless consistency equals trust over time, I guess.
Totally.
Then that summarizes how I see the brand, the brands. That's how I would probably describe them, is that you get that very same level of high quality service, whether you walk into a John Lewis to buy a large ticket price product, or you go in and say, I can't find the sushi rice, or wherever I come into Waitrose to buy, or something, something very specific, you will get that same level of personal service, interest, care, whether you're spending a little or spending a lot. That's my experience of those two brands. And I guess it is down to that formula, isn't it? That consistent, just high quality service.
I think that's a great point that you mentioned there, which is, I think there's also a lot of trust in that impartial advice that exists within both brands, but in particular for John Lewis, where in an environment where customers are probably coming from an expectation that they can really understand the range of products that exist and actually really be able to sort of see what fits for their needs. I think that's where, and if we had to sort of double click into that partner difference, it comes out quite well for us, where the level of impartiality that we have to be able to not just sell what the customer expected to buy, but also understand how it fits with their sort of needs, is probably a very interesting element of where that trust is built. Because what we hear from customers in their own words is, it's not about, I came in to spend an X amount of money and I just bought the next best product that I felt was present. It was about where I had the partner interaction. I was able to sort of really get that advice. It helped me get the right thing for me. And I think that is the kind of trust that if you build once, can really sustain that sort of almost repeatability of custom. And I think that's what we definitely see coming through for us.
Yep.
I also think, on your point of consistency, in the retail industry, it's such a volatile climate and market that I suppose if you do something, or you have a bad experience, or you kind of have a bit of a rough patch, the market is so competitive that a small mistake or a peak of like not so good customer experience, it can completely change the reputation. Obviously, right now we've not had that yet. It is up there as, I think we all know the brands that you kind of think and you look at and you're like, that's up there. It's no matter what generation as well.
Yeah.
You're going to look at that and think, well, we all know that that's a top rated brand.
Yeah, so true. You know what to expect, and then, when you go in and experience that brand, you're not disappointed. That is like the formula, isn't it, that works. And then you're like, oh, that actually was way better than X brand or whatever you compare it to in your day-to-day life. So, yeah.
I think there's something also around being conscious that not all customers are able to sort of generally voice, let's say, their frustration about a poor experience as well. I think that's where it becomes quite interesting. I mean, using a personal example recently, getting a delivery of kombucha jars in a very well packaged parcel, but you saw sort of one that was really dripping across. Now, in the scheme of things, I'd love to be able to contact the retailer and actually explain it to them. But again, that's where customers' times are so important, where would I actually take the time to be able to raise that complaint for one thing? Probably not. But maybe for the future, would I consider or reconsider the retailer? I'd probably think twice. So I think this is where that every interaction is almost an assessment of, are you as good as what you expect to be? And I think this is where this complacency bit is so important, because all it takes is one poor experience. And for the next sort of opportunity, that always lingers in the customer's mind. So I think this is where it becomes quite important to make sure that there is that feedback loop for customers. So if customers are sharing that feedback where something hasn't quite worked for them, being able to make sure that acknowledgement as well as that interaction with the customer exists to say, we've listened, we've heard, and this is what people do as a result. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it's definitely worth it, because I think there's a recent sort of number that I read, which was, I think it's about 20x more expensive to acquire new customers than to retain one. That probably speaks wonders about itself around how important it is to maintain that sort of retention.
Gosh, yeah, that's such a good point, isn't it? That is such a good point, especially with you take brands like John Lewis. You can, if you try to quantify the value of a lifetime customer for John Lewis, that could be a considerable amount of money, couldn't it? Same for Waitrose as well, if they become a regular loyal customer, for sure. Even more so potentially, because you're shopping way more often potentially. But in those settings, that consistent, when you consistently receive their business, you're consistently opening yourself up to the chance for it to not go well as well. So it's like getting that right every time is crucial, especially for those brands where you have the high volume. I think, of interaction.
Absolutely. And I think this is where I definitely feel data is brilliant, but
Yeah.
data is also the means to the end. I think making every experience count and then making sure that we are able to understand the signals regardless of where they come from. And I think this is where I've seen that not all places can leverage everything that's around them. And I think that's where we're not perfect, but that's what we're trying to do more, which is how do we pick up those signals and then definitely triangulate to understand where there are biggest opportunities for us to try and focus limited investment and time and energy, but then make the biggest impact for us and the customers.
Do you know what I've always found funny about when you look at customer experience, you're trying to measure you really want to be guided by the customer. But the truth is, in any business, about 95 to 99% more, really, of your customer interaction, you get no feedback. So let's say 99% of your customer and brand interactions, you get zero feedback from the customer, really, don't you? You can ask them for feedback. It must be frustrating in some respects, knowing that, because you're trying to work off the 1% to work out, are we getting it right with the other 99%? I've always found that an interesting dynamic of just data in this vast world of like CX.
I think, as I'm sure sort of many peers will empathize, I think getting that experience feedback isn't getting easier. It's getting only tougher, regardless of what modern tools and techniques we can deploy. And I think there's definitely a lot more out there to be able to sort of not just get feedback from customers, but also look at sort of how we observe customer behavior, whether it's on the website or the app or in shops, and using the modern tech and technologies to sort of be able to understand if the dwell time in a particular part of the shop is actually really driving that conversion into transactions and so forth. And I think this is where I feel the revolution of what we're getting through a lot of the sort of AI tools and tech that's coming down the line could be really powerful, where you don't necessarily need to sort of wait for the customer to tell you exactly how the experience panned out, but be able to look at that observational data and then make inferences from that. I think that's definitely quite an exciting space, which is a sort of data and experience professional I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can leverage. And I think to your point around getting feedback is always difficult, but actually customers do vote with their wallets and their feet. So that's where I think not just relying on feedback data, but also looking at, are we seeing those sort of customer loyalty metrics also stay consistent and move in the right direction? Because that's where I think triangulation of looking at things becomes important. So, I think it's the analogy here is, we, as a measurement and tracking lead, I feel like obliged to say it. You don't fatten a peg just by weighing it. You've really got to look at things more broadly and actually use the data to its best potential. Yeah,
I think that's so important, and I feel like people as well in this generation, they just can't be bothered to leave feedback. They get what they want. They've gotten what they've ordered. They've had their experience. They're done. It says at the end of it, when your package has been delivered or afterwards, please leave feedback. They know whether they had a good one or bad one. But I think the key thing is that when people have had a bad experience, they always, most of the time, will say something because they expect to get something back, maybe a partial refund, or I'm sorry, have 10% off your next purchase or something like that. So I think it's very telling that when you don't hear anything from the customer, customers don't usually keep in contact with the brand unless there's something wrong. So if it is radio silence, I suppose that's the only way that you can kind of tell that, okay, it's satisfactory.
Yeah, that's true.
And again, I think this is where, as you quite rightly said, it's more likely for customers to leave feedback when things go wrong versus when things deliver to expectations. Obviously, we do find that if there's an experience that goes above and beyond, customers actually will take the time to maybe share that feedback, even if it's verbally with a partner in the shop to say, that was really nice, or sort of be able to make sure that they can share that feedback if they end up sort of getting an invite for feedback and so forth as well. But I think what we definitely do find, and I'm sure this is probably true for most businesses, customers might not necessarily give feedback for a poor experience or something that didn't click in the moment, but they'll definitely share that feedback either with friends or family, or in today's sort of environment, go maybe on social to, maybe sort of vent about something that didn't quite work. And that's where I think being able to really look at some of those forums where I like to describe it, where that rich sort of feedback comes to life, which is quite unprompted but quite useful, is quite an interesting area for, I think, brands to really monitor. Because it might sound like that particular source is quite biased. But again, it comes down to there's a reason that customers taken the time to drop that feedback. So again, being able to understand it, listen to it, and be able to then triangulate it is a big opportunity.
I've always wondered, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Do you think there is a correlation between brands that really proactively invest in their customer experience, like John Lewis and Waitrose, etc., and the correlation between the level of effort you put in and then more a higher degree of customers want or more likely to give feedback? My sort of working hypothesis on this, maybe again, it'd be good to get your thoughts, is like where you feel a brand is investing heavily in this whole CX space and making sure my experience is good, I'm more likely to give feedback because I think it will be heard and I think it will be maybe acted on. Do you think there's any correlation there in your experience?
I agree. I think I'd probably maybe frame it as where there are heightened expectations from customers about sort of receiving the experience that they expect, which is definitely the case for us. It's more likely for customers to share that feedback, especially when things go really well or maybe not quite delivering the mark. And I think generally that's what we definitely find, because customers feel like it's almost a bit of a responsibility that they expect the brands to do more and they want to almost give those second chances, which is quite interesting. To that point, though, that's where I think closing the loop with customers becomes so crucial, because any customer, regardless of which brand you're interacting with, if they're sharing that feedback and if there's no acknowledgement or no closed loop around saying that we've listened to you, we've heard, and we might do something as a result of it, or even just acknowledging that feedback, I think there's a real risk where a customer might try that once or twice, but at some point, if they don't get anything back in return, they will likely just think about, why do I even share that feedback? And I think it's definitely an interesting one. So I'd say that hypothesis is valid, albeit I think it'll be good to maybe test that across the spectrum. I
don't know how. Good luck with testing that. I've always just wondered, like, where you feel like you're going to be heard or you're more likely to give feedback, probably makes sense. But I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's actually more to do with the expectation, and where the expectation is higher, naturally that's where you're more likely to give feedback, positive or negative, because your expectation has either really been met, and we've all had those amazing customer experiences where you feel compelled to write in and say, this person really helped me make a great thing, and you really want to do that, and on the negative too. But I think you're right. I think it's more to do with the expectation, where you go into that experience first of all. Let me know if you somehow see it in the numbers and whatever else. I've hijacked there with some random off the cuff questions, but do you have anything other questions?
No. So once you've collected all the data and the insights have surfaced, how do you then prioritize change or improvements from that then? So what do you use to make change?
So I think there's almost like various governance forums in existence. Obviously, being able to keep a finger on the pulse of how trends are doing, which is where the quantification of those key measures becomes quite interesting and important. So that's obviously, as any business would, we monitor those as well. I think when it comes to sort of really understanding customers' feedback to identify, obviously, we've got measures that we can link into understanding where, let's say, a particular North Star measure like CSAT or NPS is probably moving in the upwards or downwards direction, to be able to see where there could be something to look into. I think when we have the feedback and experience from customers, I think that's where being able to quantify and theme up sort of where those pockets of opportunities are is an interesting one. I think, again, most businesses have a similar mechanism where you'd look at finding a way to quantify and triangulate those themes. So let's say if you pick up feedback on a particular theme about product availability is an area that could be improved, you'd want to understand how big of an issue that is that needs to be focused upon, and then where are those opportunities, whether it's something that we can influence quite quickly versus something that might be a longer term program. So I think it's similar for us, where we'd quantify those trends, understand if there's any existing programs or tests in action to then influence those things, in which case it's more of a maybe let's monitor this and see if the impact is coming through. And then if there isn't, then how do we feed that sort of action to the relevant governance boards to then be able to take that action perhaps into account. I think this is where it becomes interesting to identify what's a program that might be something in the mid to long term that we need to drive versus shorter term interventions that we could make, test, and then see if it's actually giving us the right sort of outcome. So I think there's a bit of both that we try and do, which is, are there any short term interventions that we can make that we monitor and then test and see if it's delivering the right outcomes and the measures? And then if there's a mid to long term change program that needs to be delivered, and then that becomes a bit of an influencing sort of game, working with our sort of colleagues and CX and brand and customer teams to help sort of deliver that message, and then depending on the intervention and the investment required, seek those sort of approvals.
Well, let's try and tackle the biggest question, which is like, what does the future hold in terms of this is the easy question, right? So what, from a CX strategy perspective, is there anything you can share that you're looking at into the future? You've talked so much already, of course, so clearly about what your strategy is to get to where you are as a brand. I imagine a lot of that is going to continue into the future, but is there anything that's maybe different? It could be technology-wise you're exploring, or could be strategy-wise. Is there anything you're looking at in the future that's maybe different to what you're doing / have done to date?
I think the key thing here is being able to understand the trends on the horizon, and then what it means for us and how do we show up for customers to then be able to hopefully deliver to those expectations. But I think the interesting bit here is not just looking back and then looking at what could we react differently to, but also looking forward and proactively identifying some of those things. So, looking at sort of some of these trends that we've got emerging in the very near horizon now around how, let's say, something like agentic AI will likely play a very important role for how we as customers interact with search engines and be able to sort of help make those decisions faster and more seamlessly, is probably an interesting area, not just for us, but pretty much most businesses, regardless of whether it's retail or otherwise. So I think even looking at those kind of trends and understanding what does it mean for us, how do we sort of be able to almost keep up with those kind of expectations? How do we test something and deploy something? These are probably areas that I'm sure all retailers are looking at. And I think it's definitely becoming more of a predictive way of starting to look at these things rather than, again, rear view mirror analytics. So I think that's where I definitely feel there's a lot more opportunity.
Well, Jatin, thank you very much, because that's been a really insightful conversation on many aspects, and I've learned a few things or two for sure. But maybe we'll pick that up as like a part 2. In a year or so, we'll see where we're at, and with new technologies being deployed and stuff like that. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing those insights. That's been awesome for me, and I'm sure everyone watching. So thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and thank you for such great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Cool. Well, we've got 1 minute to do some quickfire questions. I'll kick off a quickfire question. What's one place to go in the world that you haven't been to before for holiday, for example?
I think Japan's been on our list of places, and we've been fortunate enough to travel to some great places, even the likes of Alaska, and be able to see the Hubbard Glacier up close. Japan's definitely on the cards, so hopefully some point in the near future.
That's awesome.
Got a bit of a deeper one. If you were to give yourself a piece of advice back in time, what would that piece of advice be?
How can I best filter out the noise from the signals to then be able to sort of prioritize more effectively? And I think there's a lot of value in planning really well, but then there's a lot of value in making sure you can execute other things as well. So I think basically being able to sort of really make those two things happen. So focus on the signals, try and minimize the noise, and then where you can, go full throttle and execute sort of ruthlessly. Because I think that's where the difference between making dreams stay dreams and reality is probably where the difference comes in. So yeah, 2 pieces of advice for sure.
Nice. What's your favourite sport or activity or thing that you do, for example, outside of work?
I'm going to say sort of endurance training. So really enjoy that quite a lot. I think tennis is probably my key sport, which given the time that we're talking right now, Wimbledon's drawn, so that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
If you were to be a superhero in one of the Marvel movies, I don't know, is it Superman, Marvel, I don't know, that kind of superhero, what superhero would you be?
So I think Iron Man's definitely where my head goes straight. Not to say it'd be good to sort of have a lot of tools at disposal to be able to sort of do everything that you want.
I thought you were going to say some like tech villain or something.
Yeah. No, Iron Man is. That's actually, yeah. From a tech perspective, you're so right. That is the one to pick, isn't it? For sure.
100%.
Cool. All right.